You are not here by coincidence. Something far older than your conscious mind has led you to this moment, to this message, to these very words. It is as if an unseen thread has been tugging gently at you for years, guiding you step by step toward an encounter you could neither predict nor avoid. And by the time you reach the end, you may recognize why. The awakening of the inner archetype is never loud, and it cannot be rushed. It does not come like a trumpet blast or a lightning strike. It arrives the way dawn arrives over a sleeping valley, soft, gradual, inevitable. It is a silent and profound process, a call not from the outside world, but from the hidden depths of your own soul. This awakening is not about adding something new to yourself. It is about remembering something ancient within you, something that has always been there, waiting beneath the noise of daily life. The first signs of this awakening often feel subtle, almost imperceptible. Perhaps it begins as a restlessness, a sense that your old ways of making choices no longer satisfy you. Decisions once made to please others, to fit into society's molds, now feel hollow. Instead, you find yourself moved by an inner voice, quiet, insistent, unyielding. It is not merely intuition. It is an ancient compass, pointing you toward what is truer, even if you cannot explain why. Think of it as a force both familiar and mysterious, as if a wiser part of you, buried for centuries, has suddenly risen to the surface and taken the reins of your life. It influences you with a strength you cannot trace to reason or logic. You may resist at first, but resistance only makes its presence more undeniable. Across cultures and centuries, people have spoken of this same stirring. The Egyptians described it as the Ba, the unique soul bird that awakens at decisive moments. The Greeks called it the daimon, a guiding spirit within. Carl Jung, in our own time, gave it another name, the archetype, the primordial pattern that shapes the very core of who we are. Whether in the language of myth or psychology, the truth is the same. The awakening begins when you stop living only through the expectations of others and begin aligning with the deep call that has always whispered beneath your thoughts. This inner force does not ask for permission. It does not require external validation. It announces itself as a quiet certainty, a subtle shift in your posture, a new firmness in your voice, a strange courage that surprises even you. And though you may not yet understand it fully, you know, deep in your bones, that it is real. At first, you might notice coincidences gathering around you, symbols repeating, numbers reappearing, chance encounters that feel far from chance. They are like faint constellations, slowly forming in the sky of your life, guiding you forward even when the path ahead seems unclear. What once appeared as random events now feel woven into a tapestry of meaning, urging you to pay attention. And slowly you begin to realize, this is not the story of becoming someone new. It is the story of remembering who you have always been. As this awakening deepens, you start to notice something extraordinary. A compass has quietly been set within you. Unlike the compasses of sailors that point toward the magnetic north, this one points toward the hidden truth of your own life. It doesn't show you the destination, but it pulls you, again and again, toward what is essential, toward what feels inexplicably real. You sense it most in moments of choice, where once you weighed pros and cons, anxious about the approval of others, now you find yourself guided by a knowing that cannot be explained. You decline an offer that looks perfect on paper because something in your chest feels unsettled. You accept an uncertain path because, despite all logic, it fills you with an unshakable calm. This is not recklessness. It is resonance. It is the pull of your inner archetype aligning you with what belongs to you. And as you begin to follow this compass, the world itself seems to respond. Symbols appear in the most ordinary places. A book falls open to a passage that feels written for you. A stranger says the very words you had been silently asking. Encounters once dismissed as coincidences now shimmer with meaning. You realize that life has always been speaking to you, but only now have you learned its language. This shift is not merely psychological, it is archetypal. Ancient civilizations knew it well. The Romans believed every person was born with a genius, a guiding spirit whose task was to lead them toward their destiny. Indigenous cultures of the Americas spoke of animal guides appearing in dreams and daily life, each one carrying a message from the unseen. Even in medieval Europe, farmers looked to signs in the natural world, the cry of a bird, the pattern of clouds, as signals that fate was moving through their days. What they called omens, we now recognize as synchronicities. And yet, you don't need to live in the past to feel their presence. You live them now. That song you hear unexpectedly, echoing the exact feeling you could not put into words. That number repeating on clocks, receipts, or doorways, nudging you to pay attention. These are not accidents. They are the subtle whispers of alignment. The most striking change, however, is internal. The voice of the compass grows stronger, and with it, your fear of being misunderstood begins to dissolve. You stop needing others to confirm your path, because your certainty no longer comes from outside. It rises from within you, like a subterranean spring finally breaking the surface. Even in confusion, even in moments of crisis, you feel held by something vast and invisible. It is a strange paradox. The less you explain yourself, the more clearly you know yourself. The less you cling to validation, the more your life begins to fall into place. Slowly, you begin to trust that this compass has never been wrong. Boy, it was only waiting for you to listen. The awakening of your inner archetype does not confine itself to the invisible realms of thought or silent intuition. Soon, it begins to inhabit the visible. Your gestures, your voice, even the way your feet touch the earth. The transformation is subtle but undeniable. You no longer walk through the world in quite the same way. Your body carries a new stillness, a new coherence, as though your very presence has learned to speak before you open your mouth. You may notice this in the smallest of things. Where you once filled silences with nervous chatter, now you allow quiet to breathe, and it feels natural. Where you once bent your posture to fit into spaces, now you stand with a kind of rootedness that does not need explanation. Even the tone of your voice carries a weight that it lacked before, firm yet gentle, resonating not with rehearsed confidence, but with authenticity. In history, those who underwent deep initiations were often said to return different. The young men of the Maasai tribe, after passing through rites of passage, walked back into their villages with a gaze that could not be mistaken for a child's. Medieval mystics, after months of seclusion, emerged with an aura that unsettled both kings and commoners. Shamans in Siberia were described not only by their visions, but by how their bodies seemed inhabited by a force larger than themselves. You are not alone in this shift. Across cultures, the awakening of the archetype has always changed not just the mind, but the entire bearing of the human being. And there is another curious pattern. This inner energy seems to awaken most vividly, not in moments of ease, but in times of tension and trial. Where others crumble under pressure, you feel something in you rise. At the edge of crisis, a deeper part of you takes over, steadying your breath, guiding your choices, reminding you of a strength you did not know you had. It does not mean you are spared from hardship. Instead, it means you are no longer defined by it. The storm may rage, but you are no longer only the ship tossed on the waves. You are also the ocean itself, vast, ancient, unshaken. Slowly, you realize that this transformation is not about becoming someone else. It is not an act of reinvention, nor a costume to wear for the world. It is a homecoming. It is the act of remembering the one you have always been beneath the layers of performance, expectation, and fear. Every step you take now carries the quiet authority of that remembrance. Even in confusion, you feel a strange coherence settling inside you. Life no longer feels like a desperate attempt to prove your worth. Instead, it feels like an unfolding, one gesture, one breath, one choice at a time, into the truth of who you are. As the inner archetype continues to awaken, you begin to notice the world speaking to you in a language you had long overlooked. It is not the language of logic, nor the rigid structures of reason, but a symbolic language, subtle, intuitive, and deeply personal. Numbers repeat. Images recur. Dreams return again and again, like messengers knocking at the edge of your awareness. At first, you may dismiss them as accidents, yet something inside you whispers that they are not random. That sudden image in your dream of a bird with burning wings, the repeated encounter with a certain word or phrase, the animal that appears again and again in the strangest places. They carry weight, not because society says so, but because your soul reacts with recognition. This is how the unconscious mind speaks, not with neat sentences, but with symbols. Carl Jung called it the language of the archetypes, a hidden script that transcends culture and time. It is the same language that ancient societies revered. The Egyptians inscribed it in hieroglyphs, believing every image held spiritual force. The Greeks wove it into their myths, each god and goddess embodying dimensions of the human soul. Among the Celts, the raven was not just a bird, but an omen of prophecy. Among Native Americans, the wolf was not merely an animal, but a guide to loyalty and intuition. Now, these same archetypal figures stir within you. Perhaps you feel drawn to the wisdom of the elder, or to the fire of the warrior, or to the tenderness of the inner lover. They do not appear as fantasies to become, but as mirrors of what has always lived within you. You realize you are not encountering something foreign, you are remembering something buried. These signs rarely arrive when you expect them. They appear in the silence of meditation, in the chaos of city streets, even in the most mundane hours. A song lyric that feels written for you, a shape in the clouds that mirrors your dream, a stranger's words that strike your heart with eerie precision. The world becomes alive with hidden messages, each one a fragment of the sacred language you are learning to read. And in this recognition, your perception of life itself begins to shift. Daily routines that once seemed dull now shimmer with significance. The ordinary becomes extraordinary because you are finally awake to its meanings. What others dismiss as chance, you understand as communication. The universe, once silent, now speaks to you in 1,000 subtle ways. This awareness does not demand logic. It asks only for presence. It invites you to step out of the narrow confines of the rational mind and enter a field where everything is alive with purpose, where the dream you dreamed last night, the word you stumbled upon today, and the emotion rising in your chest are all connected, threads in the same vast tapestry. And as you learn to trust this symbolic language, you realize something remarkable. Your life is not a chain of meaningless events. It is a sacred story unfolding line by line. And for the first time, you are learning to read it. As the inner archetype awakens, it does not only reveal what is true, it also unmasks what is false. Suddenly, you begin to see your life through a new lens, and what once felt natural now feels unbearably heavy. The roles you have played, the masks you have worn, the carefully constructed identities built to earn approval, they begin to crack. This realization is not gentle. It arrives with a sharp clarity, sometimes painful in its honesty. You see, perhaps for the first time, that much of who you thought you were was never truly you. They were adaptations, characters you created to survive, to fit in, to avoid rejection. You became the dutiful child, the agreeable friend, the successful worker, all while silencing the deeper voice that longed to speak. These masks protected you once, but now they suffocate you. And when your archetype awakens, pretending becomes unbearable. You can no longer force yourself to smile in conversations that drain you. You can no longer feign interest in paths that have nothing to do with your soul. Even relationships that once seemed comfortable begin to feel hollow, exposed for what they are. Contracts built not on truth, but on fear of being alone. History tells us this moment has always been difficult. Medieval mystics spoke of it as the dark night of the soul, a stripping away of illusions so profound that it felt like death itself. The Buddha described it when he abandoned his life as a prince, realizing that the golden walls of his palace were nothing but cages. Across time, those who sought truth have always had to walk through the fire of letting go, releasing not only possessions, but identities. And yet, what looks like loss is actually liberation. You are not losing yourself. You are losing what is not yourself. The masks fall, but beneath them is a face you had forgotten, raw and unchangeable. What seemed like a breakdown is, in truth, a breakthrough. You are no longer confined to roles too small to contain the vastness of who you are becoming. This process often feels like mourning. You grieve identities that you wore for years, even decades. But with each tear, with each goodbye, you draw closer to a strange and exhilarating freedom. It is the freedom of standing without disguise, of no longer scattering your energy across the endless stage of performance. And though others may not understand, though they may even resist this change, you know in your bones it is irreversible. Once you see the mask for what it is, you cannot go back to believing it. You have listened too deeply to your own soul to keep pretending. The world may call this rebellion. In truth, it is return. It is the slow but unstoppable homecoming to yourself. When the masks begin to fall away, what rushes in to fill the silence is often discomfort, restlessness, unease. For many, this is the moment they want to turn back, to cling again to the familiar roles, to return to the safety of the mask. Yet if you resist the urge to run, you discover something profound. Discomfort itself is a sacred messenger. In the past, you may have treated pain or conflict as signs of failure, as proof that something had gone wrong. But with your archetype awakening, you begin to see them differently. Every pang of unease, every spark of conflict is a lantern pointing toward the places where you are still hiding from yourself. They do not arrive to punish you, they arrive to awaken you. Psychology calls this process individuation. Carl Jung described how the unconscious will bring up tension and even crisis when the self is ready to grow beyond its old patterns. What feels like chaos on the surface is, in truth, the deeper order of your soul insisting on expansion. And history confirms this truth. The Stoics of ancient Rome believed adversity was not an obstacle, but the very forge of character. The impediment to action, Marcus Aurelius wrote, advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. In Zen monasteries, monks were deliberately placed in situations of discomfort, long meditations, sleepless nights, not to break them, but to strip away the illusions that comfort had built. When you begin to live from your inner archetype, you find yourself echoing these same lessons. What once felt unbearable now feels purposeful. A painful breakup is no longer just loss. It becomes an invitation to discover the part of you that can stand without dependence. A setback in career is no longer humiliation. It becomes the opening through which a truer path can reveal itself. And with this shift, your entire relationship with discomfort transforms. You stop fleeing from it. You lean into it. You allow it to teach you, because now you know that every moment of unease is not a wall blocking you. It is a mirror reflecting the places where your truth still waits to be embodied. In this way, discomfort becomes not your enemy, but your guide. And with every step you take toward it, rather than away from it, you become more whole, more present, more unshakably real. As the awakening deepens, you begin to rediscover parts of yourself you thought had been flaws. Pieces of your essence you once tried to hide, silence, or trade away for acceptance. Your deep sensitivity, once a source of shame, now reveals itself as empathy, a bridge to the emotions of others. Your intensity, often misunderstood as arrogance or too much, becomes clarity, a fire that cuts through confusion. Your unconventional way of seeing the world, once ridiculed, emerges as vision, the ability to perceive what others overlook. These qualities were never gone. They were only buried, pushed down beneath layers of conditioning, fear, and the endless need to fit in. And now, with the archetype awakening, they rise again, not as burdens, but as gifts. History is filled with such transformations. The ancient Greeks told of Cassandra, cursed to see the future, yet disbelieved, her madness actually being heightened perception. The prophet Jeremiah was mocked for his sensitivity and lamentations, yet his words endured for millennia. In more recent times, artists, poets, and visionaries were often dismissed as eccentric or unstable, only to be recognized later as carriers of truths society could not yet accept. What the world calls madness is often a form of sacred perception, and you are beginning to understand this in yourself. You realize you were never too much. You were always precisely as deep, as intense, as visionary as you needed to be. The problem was not that you carried too much fire, it was that the world had grown too comfortable in its shadows. This remembering is not intellectual. It is not the kind of insight you can read in a book or argue into existence. It comes as a visceral recognition, a stirring of the soul. You feel it in your chest, in your breath, in the way your emotions now arrive, not to overwhelm you, but to teach you. What once felt like chaos becomes guidance. What once felt like a curse becomes a tool. In Jungian psychology, this is the wounded healer archetype, the idea that the very wound you carry becomes the source of your medicine. The pain you endured sharpens your ability to heal. The shadows you once feared give birth to wisdom that cannot be learned any other way. And so you no longer resist these hidden traits. You stop apologizing for your depth. You stop silencing your creativity. You stop dimming the very flame that was always meant to guide you. Instead, you honor it. You wield it. You let it bloom. The awakening does not make you someone new. It makes you whole. It teaches you to embrace not just your light, but also the darkness that shaped you. For in those shadows, in those long-buried parts of yourself, you discover the very gifts you came here to share. Once your hidden gifts begin to rise, they rarely remain silent. They press against the walls of your being, urging to be expressed. The awakening of the inner archetype does not only bring clarity, it ignites a sacred urgency. Suddenly, the longing to create, to speak, to embody what you carry becomes impossible to ignore. This is not creativity for performance, not expression for applause. It is not about producing something polished to please the world. It is the soul insisting on form. The words that spill into a notebook late at night, the melodies that hum at the edge of your silence, the colors your hand longs to place on canvas, these are not hobbies. They are transmissions. They are your inner archetype reaching out into matter, shaping the invisible into the visible. History gives us countless mirrors of this moment. The mystics of Sufism spun in ecstatic dance, their whirling bodies becoming a living prayer. The poets of the Tang dynasty turned solitude into verses that still echo today. Renaissance painters, Michelangelo, Botticelli, Leonardo, did not simply craft art. They revealed visions of a divine world they had already seen within. And for each of them, creation was never optional. It was necessity. The inner fire demanded release. You may feel this same urgency in your own life. Even if no one is watching, even if the world does not understand, you feel compelled to shape what stirs inside you. The ache to remain silent is greater than the risk of being misunderstood. For silence is no longer peace, it is suffocation. And so you allow the words, the gestures, the visions to emerge. And the most striking thing? These expressions need no grandeur. You do not need a stage or an audience. The blooming can happen in the smallest acts. the way you speak truth in a conversation, the way you prepare a meal with reverence, the way you walk through a room carrying an energy that transforms the air itself. When the archetype awakens, creativity is not confined to art. It seeps into life itself. This blooming is often quiet, but it is unstoppable. Truth rarely shouts, it radiates. It does not demand to be seen. It simply is, and its presence changes everything. You may notice people drawn to you without knowing why. You may notice your words lingering in the hearts of others long after you have spoken them. The current of your inner archetype moves through you, and without effort, it leaves traces in the world. What once felt like too much now flows as sacred expression. What once felt meaningless now carries depth. And what once remained hidden now blossoms into form, marking the undeniable moment when your soul begins to live not only within you, but through you. Perhaps the most profound shift arrives when you realize that your purpose is no longer something distant, hidden like a treasure you must chase across deserts of effort. It is not a career, not a title, not a perfect life waiting at the end of countless trials. Purpose is not out there, it is in here. It has always been the very essence of your being. Before, you may have believed purpose was a destination, a dream job, a divine mission, a role to play that would finally give your life meaning. You followed maps drawn by others, measured yourself against expectations, tried to fit your soul into molds that never fit. And yet, with the awakening of the archetype, you begin to see the truth. Purpose is not something you do, it is something you are. It reveals itself in the smallest choices. When you speak with integrity instead of bending for approval. When you choose silence over reaction, peace over conflict. When you refuse to betray yourself, even if it disappoints others. In these moments, purpose stops being theory and becomes embodiment. The ancients knew this. In Taoist philosophy, Wu Wei described living in harmony with the flow of life, where purpose arises not from striving, but from alignment. The Bhagavad Gita taught that one's dharma, one's sacred duty, is not discovered by imitation, but by living authentically, no matter how humble or misunderstood. Even in early Christianity, the Desert Fathers believed holiness was not found in grand acts, but in living each moment with truth. And so you begin to live differently. The need for recognition falls away. You no longer chase applause or external validation. You begin to sense that the quiet decision to remain true, even when unseen, carries more power than 1,000 achievements celebrated by the world. Purpose is no longer extraordinary. It is ordinary, made sacred by authenticity. Preparing a meal, speaking to a stranger, sitting in silence, these acts, when aligned with your archetype, become as profound as any great mission. And something remarkable happens. The pressure lifts. The endless race to prove yourself collapses. Time itself begins to shift. You stop rushing. You stop forcing. Life flows, and you walk with it at the rhythm of your soul. Even your relationship with success transforms. No longer measured by outcomes or numbers, it is now measured by coherence, by the simple, steady act of living in alignment with who you are. The world may not notice this change at first, but you feel it. The chaos around you continues, but inside a stillness takes root. You are no longer waiting for purpose to arrive. You are embodying it, breath by breath, step by step. At the end of this long path, a truth begins to shine with startling simplicity. The awakening of the inner archetype is not about becoming someone else. It is about returning to what was always essential, to what can never be taken, to the essence that has lived within you since the beginning. You start to see that nothing was ever missing. You were not broken, not incomplete, not in need of being fixed. What was missing was remembrance. And now, with each step you take in alignment, you are remembering, not with your mind, but with your soul. This return does not arrive with fireworks or fanfare. It comes quietly, like the tide reclaiming the shore. You notice it in the way you breathe without urgency, in the way you stand without apology, in the way you no longer betray yourself for comfort or approval. You feel it in the calm that stays with you, even when life around you moves in chaos. Time itself feels different. You are no longer rushing toward the future, desperate to arrive. You stop chasing. And in that stillness, you discover you are already home. What once felt like endless searching now becomes steady walking, grounded in loyalty to your own truth. And this changes everything. Your words carry a new resonance, not because you force them, but because they flow from coherence. Your silence speaks not of withdrawal, but of presence. The way you enter a room shifts its energy, not through effort, but through the quiet vibration of authenticity. The world may not always understand. Some will still cling to masks, to noise, to the desperate search outside themselves. But you no longer need them to validate your journey, for you have touched something unshakable, your essence. And once touched, it cannot be forgotten. This is the paradox of awakening. It feels like a transformation, but in truth, it is a remembrance. It feels like discovery, but it is a return. You are not inventing a new self. You are stepping into the one who has always been here, silent, patient, waiting beneath the noise of a lifetime. So do not rush. Do not force. Truth has no urgency, only direction. Allow it to move through you in its rhythm, as it always has. For the most powerful act is not to become extraordinary. It is to live, fully and simply, as yourself. And that return, the quiet act of inhabiting your essence, is the most sacred awakening of all.